Hello, my YouTube world. This week, I want to take you to a once incredibly special place, sort of like a Disney World from 125 years ago. So we will travel to Westchester County and walk in Glen Park Island. But along the way, I did pass by the Bartow-Pell Mansion in the Bronx, and so I figured I will include it in this video. The area where the mansion stands was originally occupied by Native Americans, and in 1654, Thomas Pell purchased the land from them. The property briefly switched owners, however, it was eventually bought by Robert Bartow, who was a Pell family relative, hence the name Bartow-Pell Mansion. When Robert Bartow took possession of the land, he finished building the mansion in 1842, the building you are seeing today. And next to the mansion, there is also a carriage house built at the same time. If you take this short trail here, you will come to a recreated wigwam, a semi-permanent domed house that was used by Native Americans. Homes like these would be used for ceremonial purposes, for example, or just places where they slept or gathered as a community. It is so cool to see from up close how this was put together, because you know what? It is something that even I can probably recreate with a knife and a hatchet. So now, if I ever will be stuck on a deserted island, I right away have a plan in my head of how to create shelter. I know it sounds silly to say, but you know, it is these small pieces of information that add up to expand your imagination and critical thinking skills because, well, technically I live on an island in New York City. So if taxes, rent, and prices keep going up the way they are right now, I need to have a plan to live off-grid somewhere and to build a quick shelter for myself. But then again, it's New York City, so some city official will be knocking at my bark asking how many square feet I have inside, as they are doing an audit for property taxes. And at the same time, they will probably smack me with like 50 violations of trespassing, illegal structure with no approved plans. I would not be surprised if I get fines all the way down to no fire extinguisher and no exit sign. When they will be done, I would have to downgrade to live under leaves. If you continue walking along the path, a short distance away you can come to the end and the spot where the treaty oak grew, or the tree under which Thomas Pell formally signed the deed to buy the land from Native Americans, or at least that is the tradition. The original tree burned in the early 1900s, it was replanted, and it rather recently fell, so I'm guessing the broken iron fence indicates that. But I see another one is planted yet again. In 1888, New York City purchased the property, and that iron fence that you just saw around the tree was installed along with the mansion being restored and a garden being added as you see here. It's a fairly small garden, but in the center you have this small pond with lilies and fish. It's pretty relaxing. It's a peaceful atmosphere. As you are standing in the garden facing the home, nearby on the left, there are few, I think 6 graves of Pell family members. So if you would like to, you can even check that out. The house today is a museum, so if anyone is interested in like 19th century art, or how people lived, so like furniture for example, you might want to consider a visit to this place. There is one other place not far away from here that I wanted to show you, but it is located deep behind all those trees. And when I stepped in, I am not kidding you, I had like 20 mosquitoes on just one leg. To the point where I kind of freaked out and ran out thinking I stepped into some sort of a nest or something. So after shaking everything off, I tried going in again using another way, and the same thing happened. So I do not recommend messing around with these parts in the summer, unless you go in completely covered, like long sleeves and pants. Otherwise, the mosquitoes will eat you alive. So I will probably return to this area again in the winter, as there's still a lot more I want to show you. But for this trip, let's finally get to Glen Island Park, which is just past the New York City border in New Rochelle, Westchester County. New Rochelle is a place I will also visit again in the future. It was settled by the French, the Huguenots, who were escaping French religious persecution at that time, and they named the place La Nouvelle Rochelle, New Rochelle, as many of them were from the city La Rochelle in France. Glen Island Park is connected to the main island by a bridge which opened in the 1920s. So the bridge itself is almost 100 years old, and it does go up to allow boat traffic. In fact, I was lucky enough to catch it as it was opening. As you see, the sun was really out and making itself felt, so some angles that I'm showing might come out a little hazy, and I do apologize for that, but I had no other way to record it other than in the direct sunlight. Now, the island has a very interesting history. In the beginning of the 1800s, it was called Locust Island and owned by the Davenport family, who then sold it in 1847 to Louis Auguste de Pau, who actually worked for Napoleon III, who ruled in France. He used it as his estate for about 8 years, then selling it to John Schmidt, who was a consul general of Prussia. Yep, Prussia, as Germany did not exist yet. It was Prussia which unified all the German states into one single country in 1871. And then in 1877, John Starin took over the island, renaming it Glen Island. John Starin made his money in the shipping business, owning railroads and steamships, really flourishing during the American Civil War, as Union troops needed to be transported. At one point, he was even a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Once he acquired the island, he began turning it into a high-end resort. This was sort of like Disney World 125 years ago, and it operated from 1879 until 1904, so for 25 years. And during its 25-year run, the cost to get there was always the same, 40 cents round trip from New York City. It officially opened to the general public in 1881 as a summer resort. It was open from May until September. You would get there on John Starin's steamship, and the trip from New York City was about 1 hour and 30 minutes. And like I said, the price stayed the same for 25 years. So I did the math, and in the year 1899, exactly 125 years ago, calculating for inflation, 40 cents was like almost $16 today. That's really not bad. Today, $16, you probably cannot even park your car in Disney World. And when you got here, oh, there was so much to do and to see. I am comparing this to Disney World, but indeed you can do so because this was really one of the first amusement parks in the United States. In the beginning, there were few islands connected together. There was the main island and other smaller islands around it. Today, all of them are joined together using landfill into one single island. This was the main island, which I am on right now. You can still see some traces of the past, like few statues like this one. From certain angles, it looks like Simba from Lion King coming out in front of the kingdom, right? But back in the days, there would be lots and lots of activities here, like a rifle range, a bowling alley, along with different pavilions, sculptures, cannons, bakery. In fact, every year new attractions were added. Roughly here was the steamboat landing zone, hence you would enter the park in this area. This is the harbor house, where you can have weddings and things like that. However, in the beginning, this would have been a separate island called Clubhouse Island, where you could get something to eat in the Grand Cafe, which had close to 300 dishes. Later, in 1929, this was a site of the Glen Island Casino, which by 1930s became a speakeasy, a place to drink illegal alcohol, because remember, until 1933, there was prohibition and alcohol was banned, outside of few exceptions, like for medical purposes or religious purposes, like sacramental wine in churches, for example. Along with turning into a speakeasy, it also turned into a place of great gambling and one of the main places for bands to play at that time. The casino began its decline in the 1940s with the Second World War, as there were gas shortages, so much harder for people to travel to this location. Many people enlisted in the military, and there was also a special tax put on establishments like this one to cover the cost of war. So all these things compiled together to eventually lead to its closing. You know, this trip actually renewed my interest in this location, as there is still some things I don't know. Like this, for example. I wonder what it was. Maybe part of a mansion that once stood here, or maybe some sort of a pavilion. I'm not sure, but I'm guessing if I began digging in the Westchester County archives, I would probably be able to find some old images and figure this out. Here we are moving into what would be the third island, the Beach Lawn Island, where there would be picnic area and a beach, all true today as well. Right there in the distance is the David's Island, a site of a former Fort Slocum, which during the Civil War served as a hospital and a prison. It was used by the military until 1965, and today it is uninhabited. On these rocks we have a cannon today, but during the days of the amusement park era, a Chinese pagoda stood here, which is a tiered tower common in Asian architecture. And here we have the beach. But as you see, the beach is open only to Westchester residents and their guests. Same with essentially entering the island and parking here. So if you really want to see this place, but you are not a resident, I would recommend doing so off-season, so like after September. Or I guess you can park on the street and walk in, but again, you will not be able to access the beach. The bathhouse building itself was completed in 1929, so it's not the original piece of the old amusement park. But what do we have here? Wow, it's a relic from the past. You do not see these payphones no more. And it's 50 cents to call. They were 25 cents my whole childhood. When did this happen? But growing up in Brooklyn, the payphones were almost on every street corner. I remember there was one not even a street away from my house. So today it's kind of a thing of the past, but once it was very common. Roughly here was another island, Island Wild. So here you would play sports like baseball, for example, and more picnic areas, I guess, because you're close to the beach. Here we are walking into the zone of what would be the fifth island back in the days, the Glenwood, where eventually Starin had a zoo in the amusement park. One of the largest zoos in the country at that time. But there were far more attractions here than even what I mentioned in this video. Like, for example, there was a museum of natural history or ethnic themed villages. So you would have like a Filipino village or a Hindu village from India, and one from Puerto Rico. So it just had to be a spectacular scene when all of this was around. As we turn and head back to the bridge where we entered, I have one more thing to show you. Kleine Deutschland, or Little Germany, a German beer hall and the Starnberg Castle, along with a watchtower. So a recreation of a German castle. It is so awesome to see this from up close and a different placement of stones coming together to create a magnificent structure. Pretty cool. It is also from this side of the island that you could have taken boat rides around the whole resort, so all the islands. The theme park did not open for the year 1905, as in December of 1904, one of its steamboats burned and sunk. But we also need to remember that just few months earlier, in June of 1904, another major steamship, General Slocum, caught fire and sunk, killing over 1,000 people in the East River by Astoria Park in Queens. Something I mentioned when I did the video on Astoria Park a few months ago. Hence, two major steamship disasters pretty close to one another, so I'm sure it put fear in the general public itself, and hence a big question of whether people would come in May 1905 when the doors would have been open. Starin died shortly afterwards in 1909, and with his death, the Great Era came to an end. Afterwards, the ownership of the island changed hands few times, and finally in 1923, Westchester County Parks bought the island, building the drawbridge, the bathhouse, and connecting all the islands together using landfill. I hope you enjoyed this video and walk along with me, and I will see you next Sunday in a new location. All I can say at this point is that if you enjoy aviation and World War II history, you do not want to miss it. But until then, stay safe out there.